morning from the calendar telling you had an appointment coming up.
Oh, good. See, people who know stuff. Thank you.
Now,
Thank
I
you,
should
Scott.
just say that we are now live streaming out into the world.
Oh my God!
It
Oh
just
my
makes-
God!
You know, when you realise that the world is actually, 4 people, it becomes less of a thing.
Okay.
But I still think, I still feel excited. My daughter has now raised me in the hierarchy of my family because I've said I am technically a YouTuber now. I am live streaming. This is it. This is the moment. And so
You need to teach me. You need to teach me, Kenji, because I want to be high in my son's eyes as well, because he looks at me like, Mom,
I
video
think
with YouTube.
that means you have to volunteer to do a session, and you too can become a YouTuber and impress the
Yes.
family.
Yeah.
Okay, so for everyone else joining us, hello. This is today's, I've lost track, it's possibly the 16th virtual bridge session, hosted by, YouTube today. But we're coming at you via Teams and then rebroadcasting. Jason in the background, controlling things, rebroadcasting out to YouTube. Now, today's subject is about debunking online myths. And we did have an alternative presenter who has a lot of experience in that area, teaching her students, but wasn't able to make it, so I am filling in. So you'll just have to put up with me, I'm afraid. So one of the things I put into the description was there's a story going around, and we were just discussing it in the room today, about the fact that there's a theory going around. One of the conspiracy theories is this idea that the coronavirus is being spread through the 5G network. and that story, so I'm going to share my screen here. That story was picked up by various groups, re-amplified, and eventually resulted in this fact that people in Manchester allegedly had gone out and set fire to their local masts. Oh, look, sorry, no, Birmingham, Liverpool, and Melling in Merseyside. There's a few reports. If you look for it, please don't look for it because it's such a waste of time. But there's the idea that people can be so affected by news that's just spurious or seems to be made up, and then go out and act on it has been something that's been happening for quite a while. If you delve a little bit deeper into this 5G network, there are videos by this guy, for example, who suggests that the street lights are now contain gadgetry that includes everything up to death beams that the government is controlling that are tracking you and potentially will kill you as you walk down the street. And you think, like, when you read about some of these things, you think it's a bit silly, but you cannot believe the amount of stories that exist in these small groups. And then when you delve into Reddit or some of the other sort of online chat groups, some closed, some open, there are a bunch of people out there who take this very, very seriously. Hence the fact that masts get set alight. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Everyone else on this team chat can just interrupt or ask questions or comments or throw things at me if you wish. For all of you watching on YouTube, you can ask questions via the Twitter stream, which Jason will start looking at. And if you add the hashtag virtual bridge, one word, he'll pick up questions and we can pick those as we go along. Jason can just interrupt and tell us what those are. So my very hastily put together presentation is on the subject of fake news. And fake news is really interesting. Can I just ask, I wasn't really going to use slides, honestly, but then I thought about it and I thought I should probably pass stuff on afterwards. And when I made these slides, I will note that the URLs that I'm sticking at the bottom are in their raw format, so I will make them more accessible once I tidy up the slides. I may have just finished these slides literally 2 minutes ago. So, fake news. The idea of fake news is not something new. Does anyone in the Teams room here know where fake news started? Like as a concept?
Was it not the First or Second World War?
Oh, okay. So you could say that in terms of official propaganda.
Yeah.
Certain governments actually started creating fake news items. So one of the most famous fake news items in the Second World War was the idea of telling the Germans that the invasion of Europe would occur somewhere other than where it did, and I think they'd filled unfortunately a deceased soldier with secret information and dropped him off a plane into the ocean, where he was picked up by fishermen, and he contained all of these plans about an invasion in a different part of Europe. And it was this, and some of that was supported by reports that were being presented through the air over the radio, and so you could argue that was fake news. But the term fake news, who really kicked it all off, and this is going back in roughly 2016, 2017. Most recently, who has kicked off all of this craziness about fake news?
Mr. Trump.
So this is like one of those QI moments where I should have like a big buzzer and going, nah! But it says Donald Trump. No, oddly enough, the first person that really kicked off the whole term fake news, as it's been popularized today, was not actually Donald. It was Hillary, bizarrely enough. And Hillary had picked up on, she'd made a comment about the fact of the dangers of fake news. And it was referenced to around about the same time. There was a report going around that the Democrats were running some kind of like subversive prostitution ring outside of, I think, pizza shops or something, or within the cellars of some pizza chain. And some guy had read about it, and then he'd gone online to check to see if it was really true. And he'd found all these corresponding reports about it and chat that sort of confirmed what he now believed to be true. So he got in a truck, loaded up with these guns, and drove to this pizza shop. And he charged in, and he asked people, where's the illicit prostitution ring? Where are the people you're keeping kidnapped? He chased people out. He went down into the cellar and unfortunately didn't find anything. Oddly enough, but it became a big news story, and Hillary referenced it, and she talked about the dangers of fake news, and it was referred to as Pizzagate at the time. And following that, shortly afterwards, Trump picked it up as a term and started talking about it, specifically about the media. But prior to that, from the BBC, they had noticed that on Facebook, people had started talking about fake news coming out, specifically an area in, I'm going to say Macedonia, where people had been posting all of these fake news stories onto Facebook. And since then, it's kind of come up that fake news is actually quite a profitable affair. So in this slide here, there's this story about how people had sort of charged into Trump Tower, and the police had to go in, and it was all made into a news story. And it all was generated from this guy. I think his name is Brian, the godfather of fake news. Now, he's Christopher Blair. There we go. Brian, I apologize to all the Brians out there. So Christopher Blair is this guy who makes a living out of fake news. He was somebody who wrote genuine stories to begin with. And then when I think he happened upon, read the story if you want to find out more, he put out a fake news story, and he found that everybody was reading it, and the amount of views that it got. Now, what does that translate into if you're getting lots of views online, especially through a kind of commercially type platform like Facebook? You suddenly find that the revenue that you can make from ads of people clicking through this kind of idea of clickbait, sensational stories, and coming to your site or your stories generates a lot of income. And so Christopher Blair, quite openly, he makes stories every day, and he posts them. I don't know if he currently still does, but he did at the time of the post. And he posts them every day out there for people to pick up, and he knows they're completely untrue. Now, there are teams of people out there who exist simply to pick up on these fake news articles and then sort of try and combat them. So people like Martin here, all he does is check fake news articles and try and put out the truth. And various sort of groups now sort of do that. But it's a massive, massive story. And it all started essentially and has become popularized with started with Hillary Clinton and then taken up most strongly by Donald Trump. It's a fascinating sort of like view of how the world works. So some fake news items. Fake news exists, but it's often based on a kernel of truth. How do these things start? Why do we believe them? So what I wanted to ask the people in my Teams chat today, and you can have a view on Twitter too. Have you come across the theory of learning styles? Like the notion that someone has, like, so this is commonly taught in a lot of teaching programs, and it's not an uncommon theory. But can I ask, have you heard of the idea? A learning style is the idea that as a student that they probably fall into one of 4 or 5 kind of definitions in the type of learner that they are.
Is
So
it like visual learners and
yes,
learning through? Oh yeah, I know that. Yeah.
That's exactly it. So that, yeah, this idea that you're a kinesthetic learner, that you can learn through touch and the physical movement and interaction, or you're a visual learner, or you're an auditory learner. I think there's a test, like a VARC analysis, it's called, which can identify what kind of learner you are. And there was a lot of, I mean, it's quite a common conception, and there's a lot of theory about. So maybe we should redesign our teaching to match with this idea of, well, if we can identify the kind of learners in our classes, then we should change our teaching to suit those learners. Like I should create a visual lesson because I've identified that everyone in my class are visual learners, or they're auditory learners, in which case I could do more podcasts, I could do audio descriptive, narrative descriptions of the work that they have to do, and so on and so forth. So does anyone have any feelings about learning styles? I feel Scott has a thought about it. Possibly.
Yeah.
But, oh, okay, Scott. Yeah.
Can you hear me? Yeah. I personally, I don't really believe in learning styles. I believe that there are learning preferences, that people have preferences for the way they would like to learn, and I'm guessing a lot of them may be based on what they perceive to be the easiest way for them to learn. I'm being really cynical now, but probably partly based on laziness. It's easier to watch something than it is to read something. But I mean, when you think about learning styles, there's a really old pyramid of, we remember sort of 5% of what we hear, we remember, and it goes all the way up to we remember sort of 80% of what we do. And in that basis, I suppose there is an element of, depending on how you're taught, that you will remember more, or you will engage with more of what you're trying to learn. But I don't believe that there are learning styles. If that makes sense.
That's right. So learning styles as a theory, where it was taken to an extreme, you had examples of some teachers performing some kind of simple analysis of their students and deciding that the majority were one style of learner. And suddenly they would redesign their lesson plans to take this into account and deliver what they saw as a more visual or auditory or kinesthetic type of lesson. So the reality is that there's very little research to show that this is true. That it is true that we could have a preference for that, but the most effective way of teaching somebody is in a kind of multimodal way. You want to teach people using a number of different inputs. And although I might think that I want everything to be delivered via a comic, the reality is that if you teach me in lots of different ways, it's more likely that I'll retain that. The more it will just simply reinforce my understanding of something if I can see it, hear it, do it as a combination of styles rather than focusing on just one thing. But it's a popular myth. And the reason that these kind of myths come up is because they are based on an element of what intuitively we believe. So the simple things, has anyone heard of the thing about you only use 10% of your brain? That's a common, right? So now with neurology and the ability to sort of scan your brain and see the electric patterns firing off in your neural network when you're doing different actions can disprove things like the fact that you only use 10% of your brain. There's other things that are sort of grown up over time, like if you're a left-brained, you're more artistic, or if you're right-brain focused, you're more mathematically or science-based. I even forget the detail of it, but all of these things sound as if they're true. So you can look things up, and you find that they actually have a basis of truth, so which leads you to believe it, and it sounds intuitively true. So you have this weird aspect of confirmation bias, where you find stuff that kind of legitimizes what you think, and you kind of discard everything else because you've already kind of made up your mind and focused on it. Now that's pretty tough. It's like you find these areas where you meet people of a similar view, and you're more likely to talk to them because they share the same interests and they seem to share similar views. So you end up in this weird kind of echo chamber where your beliefs are suddenly reinforced, and you believe it to the point where not necessarily you're going to go out to your local pizza shop with a gun, but these things can have consequences. So what does it mean, and what can we do about it? Well, it's a popular thing now for every level of education, schools, colleges, university, and around, that we talk to our students and ask them, look, when you see a story, can you be sure that it's true? We want them to be asking the kind of constructive, critical questions that they can determine for themselves whether something they're being told is true or not. And those skills extend to the point of even questioning what we as educators are informing them about. You could be talking about learning styles just now and questioning whether I think it's silly and whether that's true. Quite right, you should. You should ask yourself, is what you're being true continuously? There are trusted sources out there which we are more likely to believe, but you should always at the back of your mind have this idea that we should be wanting our students and ourselves to continuously question whether things are real and to have confidence in those. Now, the BBC have a whole range of resources around this. Newsround, and I really miss John Craven as a child because I used to watch Newsround, and that was my source of trust for a lot of things. And I just found him a trustworthy kind of guy. But they've released a lot of things, and so here are some tips that the BBC have. Similar things about, like, if you see a story come up, is it getting published elsewhere? Where is it being published? Is it on a trusted site? Like, is it on a BBC site, or is it on a scottconnors.com site personal blog post? Although I always believe what Scott Connor writes as well, so that's trusted for me. But these are simple questions. Does the story sound genuine at the end of the day? There might be some technical things that show that it's not a trustworthy source, and there are clues in the way that things are being put forward. Is it an angry opinion rather than coming across as kind of stated fact? The type of writing around these stories can often give the game away. But if you're an educator and you're working with students, so what can you do with it then? Is there anything that you can do to sort of help you along this path? Well, there are sites and organizations, like, have you heard of Snopes? Snopes is a good thing for, like, if you just hear weird stories. Snopes is a website that's just basically a fact checker website. So if I go to Snopes for a second, it's just worth having a look. It's interesting to see that news reports. It's based in America, so a lot of the stories are American, but it basically checks to see what the current stories spinning around the internet are, and it'll give you a kind of background as to is it real? What are the facts behind it? Who backs it up? It's a really interesting site. But if you want something practical to do with your students, then another option is, have you come across Factitious before? Factitious is awesome. It was developed. It says 2018 there. I'm aware of it back in 2018. Basically, it's a website with an activity designed for your students, and it takes you through fake news articles, and it gets you to try and guess whether this article is a fact or a fiction. And there are various clues in it, and it will give you feedback as to how you're going on. Now, they've developed new factitious sort of exercises every year, 2018, 2019, 2020. And they've recently released one that's on the pandemic edition. I've never even looked at it. This is literally just an excuse for me to go click things online and see what it's about. I've never played this game before. So like we're doing it together. Now, somewhat similar to another app, if you think something is true or fake, you can respond by swiping left or right. Some of you may be more familiar with that interface than others. Completely new to me, obviously. So swipe right if I think something is real. So basically, it presents you with a series of stories, and it gives you the option also to see the source of the story. And they're interesting. Like this idea of, is it true? Is it not? I can see the source here is mydailynews.com. You read through the story. Do you think it's real? Do you think it's not? So this is basically about a New Jersey woman who gave a fake name and disappeared after testing positive for coronavirus virus is found. So she was in the States. She went in. She was identified. She ran away. More than 260 people have tested positive for the coronavirus in the state of New Jersey, according to the officials. At least 20 of those cases have been in the Essex County area. Let me see. Alan, do you think it's real, fake? The unidentified woman walked into an East Orange General Hospital on Saturday, where she was then tested for COVID-19.
Being American, anything's possible.
Would you go for fake? Would you go for positive?
No, I'll go for it's true.
It's true. It's such a trusting soul. Let's see. Correct. Oh, look at that. See, you don't need Snopes. You just need Alan. So Bill and Melinda, there's a new one for someone else. Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and others predicted up to 65 million deaths via coronavirus in a simulation that ran 3 months ago. Who knew? So the story essentially tells the story of how they tested this simulation. There is no... Oh, we have the source. Okay, the source was Infowars.com. It basically, the article said, entitled "The Event 2201 Pandemic, the high-level pandemic exercise, dropped participants right in the midst of an uncontrolled coronavirus outbreak that was spreading like wildfire out of South America to wreak worldwide havoc in the simulation. It resulted in the death toll of 65 million. So just off the top of that, Svetlana, do you think this is real or fake? We could ask Alexander, your son, as well.
Oh, he ran away to his room. He's already streaming live.
Quite right.
I'll go with fake.
Fake. Let's that way. Correct. Yeah. So the exercise is interesting. Like going through the stories, although it's quite simple, it's a really interesting sort of exercise. And I think the fact that those kind of things exist are really useful if we just want to like start the conversation with our students. Like the BBC, as I said before, have like a ton of really useful sort of resources, and they're relevant, I would say, mostly for the school sector, but there are a few kind of really cool things in there. The evidence toolkit is pretty good when talking about looking through data to verify the stories that come up to see if they're true or they're fake. And people can use real data, but focus on a tiny sample size that gives the results they're looking for, but are actually true, but when you look at a wider range, you'll find that in the bigger picture tells you that the story is probably false. There's like an interactive iReporter game, which is actually really, it's quite funny. A good thing to try out. I won't run it here because then I'll be running video on video, and it will all go horribly wrong for me. The BBC, as always, what a great source. Not all fake news is necessarily trying to trick you or get you money or to watch their ads. I read a site called The Onion, which is basically makes a living of making fake news, but it's fake news for satire, for comedy, and that is a valid format of news. And really, if you're reading an Onion story and you believe that it's true, with all the clues that it gives you and explicit messages, really, yeah, you should just be reading more closely. So I'll share these slides. There's a video you can watch that has a bunch of interesting science experiments attached to it. And you can decide for yourself whether you think those are real or fake. So I'll put the link to these slides in the program afterwards, but I won't play it just now because it will take too much time. Now, I think sometimes the best way of learning about fake news is to actually participate in the act of fake news. It's in the same way as we had to develop a resource around cybersecurity, and it was kind of a mandatory e-learning thing where you had to sit through 15 minutes of just clicking through slides, much like this, and to hear all the tips about how do you spot fake emails and people trying to scam you and stuff like that. And when somebody phones you, gives you a call and asks you that you've just been involved in a car accident and they want your details, how do you recognize that that's not a legit thing? And all of the techniques that we tried, which are basically just pushing out the story, scaring people, getting them to work through exercises, quizzes to see that they've read whatever they've done, those are not always particularly effective. What really is effective, though, we found, is we tried a short experiment where we got people to write phishing emails, like to write an email that was designed to get other people to click through and show that they've been tricked. This is a game you can play with all your families and friends, especially now that you're isolated from home. And this is an exercise that's pretty similar, this bad news site. So the bad news site essentially is like a simulation. You play a game where you essentially have to spread fake news, and you're just going through a series of steps. It's like a branching scenario. It's like those books that you might have read when you were, well, when I was younger, which was like an adventure story where you read to the bottom of the paragraph and it says, do you want to go left or right? If you want to go left, turn to page 192. If you want to go right, turn to page 17. And you could follow a story that branched in different ways as you went through. So this is pretty good. It has the same sort of idea. It leads you through the ideas of how do you post fake news, and gives you a number of choices. And as you go through, it gives you a score of how well you're doing and how you're fooling people. But it's really simple, but it really gives you an insight into how these things work. So these kind of simulations, they are awesome. They really are engaging, and really worth a try. So bad news, getbadnews.com. It's a good exercise if you want students to have a go. Now, I know I'm pushing 30 minutes here. In fact, I'm looking at the time and it's on my screen, so like it's not like I can't see it. If you want to try some of these things yourselves, I was going to go. There are two things I was going to show you. Have you all heard of H5P? I'm assuming. No, H5P is it was a Norwegian project that started 3 years ago. A series of kind of open source activities. You can build short activities online and then either share them through your VLE or independently through links, and it's all free. It's a really interesting sort of resource. But inside there it has a number of different activities that you can do. And if you want to try something along the lines of the kind of bad news or the fake news stories, there are some really good tools such as this kind of branching scenario, which is called branching scenario, which sort of leads you through different paths and gets your students to try out different things. And it's good in the sense that you could apply this in a lot of different ways. It's one of the better activities within H5P. The other two that I really rate are interactive video and the documentation tool. But I might talk about that later. But branching scenarios are similar if you want to construct something that you see in some of the examples in these slides. Right, so I'm sure Jason can tell me how much time I've got left. Like none, I suspect. 5 minutes ago. There you go. I totally want to show you something. So I used to work with this guy called Martin Hoxie. He's now the Chief Technical Officer at the Association for Learning Technologies, ALT, which is a supremely wonderful organization if you want to learn more about learning technology. I may do this one later. It's a really cool thing where basically I'm working with a group of lecturers who are going through a data science course, and one lecturer had wanted to look at how our tweets, social media, if you tweet something, how effective is that tweet? Where does it go? Who follows it? Who retweets it? Who sees it? And Martin developed this thing literally, it must be going back, what, 5-10 years ago now. He developed this kind of simple way to collect tweets and see what happened to them. And when I was thinking about this kind of exercises, if you wanted to run like a fake news campaign to see how effective you were, you could do it through Twitter using a fake account, and you could actually monitor the data to see how effective your Twitter campaign was. I don't know if I'm just simply teaching people to do bad things now. Let me think about that later. But okay, sorry, I know we're coming to the end. So fake news, has anyone come across anything in their teaching or their learning and teaching where fake news or the ability to recognize fake news is actually a useful skill? No, we're all on it. You're all still hating me for the learning styles thing, apart from Connor, Scott, who's with me. We're an army of two. So, Walter, fake news. Now you have experience of school sector, wider sectors. Do you see fake news as being an issue in education at the minute?
Well, I think it has to be, but as part of a more general digital literacy approach, I think in schools. I think you need to look. We've always taught young people about the provenance of things on the internet and how to look at the, as you say, what kind of site is it on? Is it replicated elsewhere? I think what we have now is this what you call the echo chamber, the amplification, and I think that is something that has really. I'm not quite sure how schools would grasp that particular nettle, that it's no longer just simply going onto a website and looking at something. It's now information coming at you along all these different channels, some from your personal friends, some from your family, some from news agencies. So I think it is a huge challenge, but it's one that in terms of education we need to step up to the mark.
Okay. So just for the people watching the live stream, we've reached 30 minutes. So I suspect that this is just really the start of the conversation. And literally, I would spend the next, sadly, hour taking you through some of the other weirder sites and exercises that I found around this topic. But hopefully you'll be able to join us tomorrow, which I believe the topic is data science in colleges. I'm not entirely sure who's presenting tomorrow, but I'm sure it will be interesting. So if you have time, hopefully you'll join us then. And from next week, we will be restarting these sessions as a more community sort of chat-based thing within Teams. But until then, please stay safe, and I hope to see you at a future session. Thanks for joining.
Thank you, Kenji.
Okay, that was just my pause, just so that Jason can stop the feed. And in fact, I think it's me that's stopping the feed. Oh,